something's just not working, and we stop. We stop and we fix the story. Because John Lasseter, who's one of the founders of Pixar, he really instilled a culture of story, story, story. And even though Pixar is the most technologically advanced studio in the world, John has a saying that's really stuck, which is no amount of technology will turn a bad story into a good story.
No amount of technology will turn a bad story into a good story. In this episode, we delve into storytelling and its use in tech marketing, redefining how brands connect with audiences. Steve Jobs famously said, "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller," reflecting his belief that stories, not features, are what people remember. He was a master at simplifying the complex, delivering iconic lines like 1,000 songs in your pocket for the iPod, and the computer for the rest of us for the Macintosh, capturing both the essence of the products and their emotional impact. Jobs didn't just market technology, he built a narrative around creativity, empowerment, and challenging the status quo, making Apple synonymous with innovation. He established storytelling as a powerful tool for branding in an industry that had previously focused on specs and technical jargon. Welcome to Season 9 of The Great Indoors, where we explore the transformative role of storytelling in an era of generative AI. As technology shapes our culture and products, the risk of homogeneity looms large. This season will discuss how embracing unique narratives can counterbalance AI's influence, ensuring our stories retain depth, authenticity, and originality. Join us as we champion the human voice in the digital age. I'm your host, Matthew Roberts, and as ever, I'm joined by my producer, the one and only Larissa Yee. Now, just in case any of you got a little excited there in our opening, we don't, unfortunately, have Steve Jobs on the show today. Although many would argue, given the advancements in AI, it's potentially feasible. Maybe that's an idea for a future episode. Anyway, let's go back. I was fortunate to host a panel at MWC Las Vegas last October with an ensemble of CMO Galacticos from North America. And joining me on that panel was Jeff Hollingworth from Rakuten. Jeff defines himself as not a normal CMO and has had an illustrious career in technology to date. And as a fellow British emigre, we hit it off on stage in Las Vegas, and I knew at that moment we had to have him on the show. We had great audience feedback from that session as well. So to continue the conversation we started back in October, I'd like to welcome Jeff Hollingworth to The Great Indoors today. So welcome back to The Great Indoors, Season 9. We have another great guest for you today in this new season dedicated predominantly to storytelling. So today's guest, he's in the UK right now, temporarily. And if you were watching our social media, he was actually on stage with me just over a month ago in Las Vegas. So it's a pleasure and an honor to welcome to The Great Indoors today the CMO of Rakuten Symphony, Mr. Jeff Hollingworth. Jeff, welcome to The Great Indoors.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I like that. I don't think I've ever been introduced as the great something before, or even great closely linked in a sentence. So that sounded really good.
This is it now. This is your new title from this moment on, Jeff. Your new title. So how are you doing today? I mentioned you were in the UK. Just for our listeners, let us know where you are, what the weather's like, and how the day's looking.
Yeah, so currently I'm in the north of England, on the west side of Sheffield, which is just on the Peak District. If you since we're going to be talking a bit about storytelling, it's very close to where the Bronte sisters used to live and the Yorkshire Moors. So if you're familiar with any of those stories, the genesis of that was born in this environment. And it's the start of winter here. It's just turned into a very crisp, very clear sky.
Well, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. We have some local Sheffield questions lined up later on for you.
Okay.
That should be good. And my father went to university in Sheffield, by the way.
It's a very well-known traditional university here. So yes.
Right. So let's for our listeners, Jeff, give an introduction of yourself, your history, and your role as CMO at Rakuten Symphony.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually born in Sheffield, so this is where I grew up, but haven't lived here for 40 plus years. But while I was growing up here, I was fortunate. My parents bought one of the first home computers, so I was one of the first people to start programming computers and learning software. I went to school. I did A-level computer science before computer science was recognized as a real subject. And then I went to university before computing science was recognized as really a real degree. The rest is history. And then I fell into telecom coming out of university after a stint at CERN that was very interesting in Geneva, the research place. And ironically, while I was at CERN, Tim Berners-Lee was there just the year before inventing the World Wide Web. And then I went into Ericsson when no one knew who Ericsson was. And then, of course, they became the main people who were making handsets and doing mobile phone networks. So I was never the person doing anything, but I was always very close to them. And so did software for 20 years. It's still my hobby, but then have progressed through consulting, marketing, business development roles, Ericsson, Deutsche Telekom startups, embedded inside AT&T. And now I'm with Rakuten, which is the Japanese Amazon. Maybe that's the best way to describe them for the Western world.
And normally you're based in Dallas, right, Jeff? How long have you been in the United States?
We moved there 1996. We've actually lived in Dallas longer than we've lived anywhere else. So yes, we're fully fledged US citizens.
So tell us a little bit about Rakuten, its brand, and how it plays into the telecom ecosystem.
Yeah, so Rakuten's interesting because it's not a telecom company. As I said, it's an online digital leader. It started in 1997 at the same time as Amazon did with e-commerce. And since then, it's perfected the art of digitalizing businesses. It's got over 70 different online businesses now through media, through travel, fintech, and into communications. So Rakuten started doing telecom because it felt that connectivity should be an integrated part of the online experience, and it should behave and participate like all other online businesses and be part of that ecosystem. So Rakuten's a bit interesting because it's an internet company doing telecom rather than a lot of people in telecom wanting to work more like internet companies.
And what about the Rakuten Symphony brand? What sets that as? That's the arm dedicated to telecoms, right?
Yeah. So the history is that they decided that they wanted to become the fourth mobile operator in Japan because the Japanese government wanted to shake up the existing market. So they introduced this fourth entrant. So Rakuten built a complete cloud native, fully automated, open RAN mobile network.
It was the first Open RAN, wasn't it? Was it the first? Yeah.
It was. There's a lesson in that. It was Open RAN wasn't fully, as air quotes, standardized when Rakuten started doing this. Internet companies don't wait for the standards. Standards make life easier. It's not something that you should wait for. So they were really successful in building a completely different cost structure, radically more efficient, completely automated mobile network. But to do that, they had to build their own support systems, operational systems, and all of the network cloud software. And then they realized that's what other operators had to do around the world. And that's where they decided to create another company called Rakuten Symphony that I work for. And it's our job to take that blueprint and that technology and that proven implementation and fit it into existing operations where it makes sense.
Okay, understood. Excellent. Now, Jeff, you define yourself as not a normal CMO, right? Why is that? What is not normal?
I think I like to. That's a really good question. I like to define myself that way because I don't think it's about marketing. Is not about promotion. Marketing is really about explaining why things make sense and building new mental models for people to understand the future better. And in my experience, if you can start to paint a picture of what the future looks like, where everyone can feel that's where they're heading, but they can't make sense of it. If you can start to help them interpret that future so it suddenly clicks in their minds, it empowers them to make the right decisions. And then if you're the right company to help them, then it's a great way to make sure you're the right business partnership there.
Yeah. It's almost like Albert Einstein said, real intelligence is about taking really complex, difficult topics and make them sound easy. I think he didn't say that verbatim, but I think that was the essence of his famous quote, right?
If he was as eloquent as you, he would have said that verbatim, exactly the way that you just said it. I think there is a strength in that, where you're trying to take the unexplainable into explainable, but not too, not too simple. The magic is that you simplify, but you don't simplify too much, because then you go the other way and the value decreases again.
Yeah, I have this theory, and in the world of marketing, that it's almost like a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you can go uber crazy, technical, gobbledygook, and confuse the heck out of everyone. And that works. I've seen that work for some marketeers, because people go, oh my gosh, I have no idea what they're talking about. They must be really smart. I need to look into this, right? Or you have the other end of the spectrum, where the narrative and the conversation is too infantile, too simplistic, too kindergarten. So like you said, it's getting that balance on the spectrum that appeals to a broader audience, so they really understand the essence of what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and you've just described the toolbox of all engineers in the world. Having spent the first half of my career in engineering, the way that engineers get their own way is by describing things in ways that other people don't understand, but they feel disempowered and stupid if they point it out. And all engineers believe they can do marketing.
Yes.
There's no problems with that. So one of the fortunate things in my career that I really have my parents to thank for is, because I understand how software works, then I have the confidence to hold that leverage from the engineering side in check in a technology world. So I can stop that force of nature where the engineering world will run over the decision-making process sometimes.
And that gets us into, you have a deep understanding and heritage in engineering, but you're also, in many respects, Jeff, a natural communicator, a natural storyteller, right? And I know this personally because I've met and spoken with you many times. When we look at all the magnitude and the pace and the plethora of technical innovation, and we look at the market demands and articulating this, how important now is storytelling in, as we discussed, getting that message across? Is it now more important than ever before?
I think it's always been incredibly important since the beginning of time. I think we as a human species sometimes forget that and have to get reminded of that. But I was thinking, just because we chatted before this podcast and about the subject, storytelling is just about the one behavior that you can trace back since there's been any kind of visible written word or visual word by the human race. It's what was painted on walls in caves, and it's what's really powered culture and imagination and making sense of the world. So I think it's it's so fundamental to how we work. We don't realize how important it is.
No, and I think you're right. I think even if you look at, before, like you said, the written word, or before people were literate to the extent that they are today, I mean, you even just have to look at the Bible in many respects, which is an assortment, a collection of stories that people memorize because they're compelling and then retell. And, that's what propagates things forward in time. So I think you're absolutely right. I really want to get into like the human genesis of storytelling in this series. Not today necessarily, but I think you make a really good point. It's fundamental to mankind, to humanity, right? The ability to tell stories.
Well, I think that's how we are designed to understand the world, because it helps us simplify what perhaps is not obvious for us. And it maybe is what sets us apart from other animals and other living things, that we work in symbols, we work with things that don't exist, but we can communicate in common ways and design contexts that help us understand something that sometimes is not even real.
Now, we have a mutual friend, Mr. Chetan Sharma, and we attend his event in Seattle every year. And this year at his event was something very different. You've been there before, Jeff. You've seen the lineup. Typically Chetan will bring in C-level execs from T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon. They'll talk how great their 5G networks are, their speed, their latency, their coverage. But I think it's fair to say 5G still hasn't lived up to the promise and the prophecy and the speculation that we've talked about for years. And it was interesting that Chetan, along with my boss, Gil Rosen, had a discussion where potentially 5G hasn't yet reached its promises because the storytelling behind it was somewhat lacking. The service providers focused on those technical metrics. It became a KPI race. It became an arms race. I've got better coverage. I've got more spectrum. I've got, whereas all of those stories, all those use cases, maybe weren't communicated correctly in the marketing or the storytelling. What's your thoughts on that point, Jeff?
I find what we do in marketing in our telecom industry bizarre. We market a technology that unfortunately people don't care about because it doesn't really deliver a promise that affects how they live or work. Originally, we did deliver a promise like that. So when we started off as an industry, I go back all the way to the start. 2G wasn't a thing, by the way, in 2G. That's history getting rewritten. It was simply that you could speak everywhere. Then you could message everywhere, and then you could get online everywhere. And the value propositions for those are very easy for people to understand. And then you build a business model and an investment plan, and you get paid for that if you're good at what you do. I think around already starting somewhere 3G, 4G, 5G, we started to get more excited about the technology and what we could do than perhaps delivering experiences and promises to customers. And I think that's where we start to disconnect from what people really care about. I can't think of another industry that's so passionate about leading with technology. There may be ones, but I can't think of one.
Yeah. And what lessons? Right, so already the industry is talking about 6G, right?
Because 6G is gonna fix 5G, Matthew.
Well, 4G fixed 3G, right?
That's right.
And isn't it weird that the even numbers in the Gs are generally more successful than the odd numbers?
Yeah, based on a sequence of 3 numbers, by the
way. Yeah. So how would you market 6G? What if you had to come up with the strap line, the punch line to define what that's going to do to society, to consumers, society, and businesses? How would you define it, Jeff? Because you put the nice package, the 2G and the 3G there nicely, I'm probably going to steal your strapline just to let you know in advance here. But how would you position it?
Is this how you can only work 2 hours a day in your marketing job?
This is how I got where I got to. Right,
Yeah.
Jeff? Yeah. All storytellers are liars and thieves. Isn't that the other old adage?
So where I'd start is by not thinking about 6G at all. I think the best way for us in the industry to think about this is we're now in another massive technology shift with AI, and AI is a thing. It is going to dramatically change existing value chains for both good and for bad. So I think the way I approach this is that you don't look at now, you look at 2028, 2030, and you look at how the world is going to have changed because of this. And then you start to design and test hypotheses around, if the world is moving this direction at scale, what's missing, both in terms of things that to solve new problems or things to deliver on new opportunities. And one of the, I think, largest changes that's going to happen in society, don't care if it's me and you speaking as friends in a pub or it's in a business, we actually are going to start struggling to understand what's true or not, what is real or not. As an example, you're at the moment assuming that you're speaking to a real me. You actually have no evidence of that. I might not be here at all, and this is a complete recording that you're interacting with. This is an AI hallucination for you. I maybe don't want to participate here, and the things that I'm saying are not the things that I want to say, but you have no way at the moment to validate that I am I. Now, all of business has moved online, and we inherently, implicitly trust, especially when we see photographs, especially when we see video, especially when it's live, that is real. I don't think that's true in the future. And I think that future arrives very, very quickly. So suddenly, I think we're going to repeat what happened at the start of the internet of how do you know you can trust the news? You have to start trusting bodies that you believe are trustworthy that then validate those entities that you're trusting with. So suddenly in the UK, the BBC brand became very valuable because people felt they could trust it. I think telecoms brand, because it's defined by national boundaries, is regulated by government, so inherits government's trust, and it's a fully digital business. I think there's a massive opportunity for telecom to play a very active role in building trust in the next era. For me, that we already see this in 5G. I think we can build on this and become the platform of that honesty in the future.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I hadn't thought about it.
Okay with that. Should we quit now?
No. I've just emailed my boss and said I've got a great idea.
You transcribed that live and you put it into your voice, didn't you? You literally, yeah.
I'm using generative AI, Jeff. Right? I've got it. It's done. Right? No, that's brilliant. That's really, really brilliant. That's really food for thought. Staying on the topic of generative AI, we were in Las Vegas last month on stage at MWC with some other marketing CMOs, Randy Zuckerberg and Ami Badani. And we talked about generative AI and the impact it's going to have on marketing as a discipline. How are you right now looking at generative AI? How is it influencing what you do in your day-to-day, the way your teams perform, what they produce? How is it affecting you right now, Jeff?
I think generative AI is a tool that we're using to allow us to accelerate our speed to process information, to summarize content and marketing collateral we have into different forms, different ways, No longer do you have to employ somebody to give me 6 different creative ideas around, how to break down a white paper and best promote it and trigger it and run experiments. So I can industrialize that process of the A/B testing, the maximizing of the assets that we have, which we used to think was a quite creative work, and I think is very easily replicable into AI because there is a known formula for doing those things. I think that's going to completely change how you can better make use of the assets you have. I think what it will not do yet is create the value and the assets, because at that point, it can't create the original thought. That's what I mean. And that comes back to the storytelling, where I think that's why it is becoming the most important skill. Coming back to your question, it's always been important, but in this era, I think it's going to ultimately define who is good at marketing or bad at marketing, is who can best tell those stories that explain what they're seeing and build a picture of the future.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. And the question in this series of podcasts that we're asking every guest, and I think you just answered it there perfectly, Jeff, is can AI ever replace humans when it comes to storytelling? We're in agreement. We don't believe at this stage it can. But what I think is interesting when we look at technology as a whole over the years, everything eventually becomes digitalized, right? Whether it's television, whether it's social media, whether it's banking, whether it's healthcare, everything we do in our life eventually becomes digitalized. I don't believe storytelling as a fundamental human skill from the dawn of time, I don't think that can ever be usurped by generative AI yet. But that's my thesis right now that I'm sticking to.
So that's going to be your PhD, and the last word in the title is going to be yet.
Yeah, well, I've come up with an even profound strapline for this. To me, storytelling is the last bastion of humanity.
Yeah, I think that's remarkably deep. Actually, I think there's a huge amount of truth in that. Here's a good analogy, maybe, and I've used this previously. I'm going to replace consultants for AI now, which maybe shows where we're going. I used to say if I employed consultants to write me a Western and produce me a Western, then make me a Western with the right number of horses, the right number of good guys, bad guys, in the, 4 shootouts, everything would be perfect. But if I want a Western that people actually enjoy, watch, and will generate money, I need to have Tarantino come in and put something else, some other magic, some other humanity on top of that. And suddenly you're watching a Tarantino Western, which is completely different from, 200 other Westerns.
Seth Godin, the author, wrote a book about the purple cow. So in order to stand out in a herd of cows, be the purple one, right? And generative AI, and I'm plagiarizing many of the guests that have been on the show, but generative AI can create a monoculture, homogeneous content, because it's a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. So going back to that differentiation, that can only come from a human and from a human's history and personal experiences. How important do you think it is to understand or to have a comprehension of one's personal history in order to excel at storytelling?
Well, so I think I completely understand the angle now. So let me say the strapline, as you say, the headline, and then I'll dig a bit deeper. Lived experiences are always another level of intensity in a storytelling moment. And it's very hard to fake lived experiences. There's almost something again in humans where you can see in people's eyes that they have gone through something. And it's incredibly powerful if you can relate to it, or if it's part of your history, or it's something close to you. And I do recommend to everybody, especially in this day and age in technology, that if your parents, grandparents, whoever are starting to get older, the challenge is that when they're no longer here, their story disappears. And in my experience, especially with my parents' generation, they didn't want to tell that story. So I was fortunate enough, this was just at the start of having good enough video cameras in devices. So it was quite easy to sit my mum and dad down and actually say, tell me what happened, in the earlier parts of your life. In that process, and you can see it in these videos, they're actually, I've stored them up on YouTube, but you can see when he disappears into the story, his eyes disappear from the present and go into the past. And he just became a complete storyteller. And he told me things that none of us knew. He'd never told us. I mean, he told me this story because he lived through all the fantastic Gary Oldman moments in these Hollywood movies. He told me when, because I asked him, where were you when Winston Churchill said that we were going to fight them on the beaches? And did you listen to that? And he just looked at me and said, oh yeah, we all listened to it. And there was a limited number of wireless sets at the time. So everyone grouped around the wireless set and we were listening to Churchill speak about, we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the fields. And we were all looking at each other going, is this guy smoking something? Have you seen what's just happened? Here we are, we've got a fork. We use our fork to eat food, and now we're running towards this. You could see that you couldn't do that without being there.
No, and I think, like you said, the power then. We had a guest on yesterday, and I asked him, what's the best, recount a story for us. We're going to do it a little later on. That, what's the best story that you've ever heard? And he said, no, what's the best story I ever felt? And I think with any storytelling, where it elicits emotion and an emotional response for the listener, that's something, again, that I don't think can be replaced by any sort of machine. Yet, but I think, like you said, that you could see your father's eyes, you could see him disappearing into the story. This is humanity, right? At its core.
It's very hard to understand the algorithm of what makes us feel things and how we understand feelings and connections with other people. There's something so subconscious to that, I think, that we're still a long way from being able to put that into silicon and remove it from carbon.
And do you think as well, we talk fundamentally how storytelling is important in marketing and important in the business. Can everybody be a storyteller? What are the ingredients you need as a human to deliver emotional, effective, memorable, entertaining stories?
Yeah, I think everybody can be a storyteller because I think it's something that we all do innately. But it's like all skills in life. If you practice, train, and become conscious at it, you can perfect the craft of telling good stories. I mean, my daughter also is more expert on this. She studied creative writing. She's got a master's in it. There's ways that you can develop your skills and your understanding and awareness. And when she was learning everything at university, the way that you learn is not academically. You go back in time and you look at, she read Middle England literature. She studied Shakespeare to the depth. All of those stories are still, if you ever wanted to know the storytelling hasn't changed, it's the fact that Shakespeare still makes sense to us, actually. Yeah.
No, and the reason I asked the question is I have a team spread all over the world. And the one thing I am focusing on with every single one of them now is the ability to tell a story, to be comfortable, to feel confident in how you deliver that narrative, whether it's relating to what we do as a business, what we do with our customers, or just even their own personal experiences. I think it's such a key skill.
Well, I would then reverse the questions back to you, because I think one aspect that's very hard that you've just made me think of is actually cultural differences in storytelling. So do you feel that inside your global team?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, if I was to try and tell a story in French to a French audience, it would be very difficult to how I retell a story in English to an English-speaking audience. And I think we take it for granted that English is the universal language of business. And therefore, when you think about it, for other marketeers where English isn't their first language, or they operate in a market where they're not even speaking in English, then it's a very different challenge for them, right, to tell the stories. And I think even, you and I are British originally and moved to North America, but I think the way the British sense of humor and the British way of delivering a story works differently in the United States and Canada. Don't you agree?
Well, I think that's where exactly my brain was going. If you look at the English Office and you look at the American Office and how they had to translate the same concept, those are nothing to do with each other. But the English approach didn't work in the US, and the US approach, I think, would be equally challenged in the UK. And that's with the same language. That's with the same words. That's, we all feel like we're the same, but we're separated by a common language kind of thing.
That's what Oscar Wilde said, 2 countries separated by the same language. I'm full of the quotes today. I don't know where this is generative AI in front of me, Jeff, that's helping me here. Anyway, so I'm going to test your storytelling skills now, because this is our regular segment that we've introduced into this season. We call it TGI Storytime. And I'm going to ask you to give our listeners a story that you've heard in your lifetime. It could have been a book you read, a movie you saw, a song you heard, a poem you read, something your father told you about World War II. Whatever medium it was delivered to you in, I'd like you to share a story in your own words about something that's had a significant or profound impact on your life. So, Jeff, this is TGI Storytime. TGI Storytime.
I think I'll tell a story about my discovery of storytelling. So when I was first growing up, I was 7, 8. My mother desperately tried to make me read, and it just had no interest to me whatsoever. And I used to bring her comic books to read, and you can imagine this was like, no, we're not doing, we're not going to read picture books that says kapow and ow and, things like this. So she gave up on me. And I always remember it was probably when I was about 13 or 14, I picked up a book by a South African author by the name of Wilbur Smith called When the Lion Feeds. And for some reason, I started reading it. And I always remember this emotional kind, almost like Doctor Who TARDIS time travel thing, where for the first time in my life, somebody had taken me to a world that was somewhere else, that absolutely existed. And that's where I went and lived. And then I became obsessed with reading fiction and consumed it at a massive amount, because it became the place where you go when you don't want to be where you are. That's the power of like fictional storytelling. And the ability for certain authors to, in half a page, create a character that you actually care about and you are deeply connected to. I think that, again, coming back to your point, I think that's very hard to engineer and replace. There's something magical, and some authors, Wilbur Smith can do it. James Archer, I always felt, could do it. There's some authors that are just incredibly good at that. So my journey into storytelling, I did that for about 5 years, 6 years. And increasingly, unfortunately now, which is what I get frustrated is I tend to read so much business stuff now that I don't read as much fiction. But if I pick up a book, a fiction, I'll read it within about 4 days. My problem is I know that's going to be the case, which means that it's a bit, I have to put work on hold and do that.
But it just made me realize, and that's a great story, Jeff, is that the educational elements in storytelling, right? To get children engaged and have their undivided attention on a topic can only be done through storytelling, right? They have to, and the example I like to use is my son. You know, if you think about it, Titanic left Southampton in 1912, hit an iceberg, sank, and a lot of people died. But, you know, and it was a marvel of modern engineering, but that was the story, right? And then James Cameron takes that story, turns it into this incredible blockbuster with these amazing images, the characters, like you said, some of them fictitious, some of them not so. But this engaged my 7-year-old son so much into maritime history that now he's reading about everything to do with the Royal Navy, watching shows on Discovery about, you know, shipbuilding and naval history. I'm like, the Titanic movie got him into this, and he's become like a little encyclopedia because of that story, right? That got him into that topic. So there's a huge, like you said, once you got into that book, once it embraced you and grabbed you, that was it then, right? You were hungry for more. And you were away.
Yeah, you disappear. You mentally disappear. And then you can feel almost your mind is designed to do this, and it's looking to expand. I think you're completely right. I think there's a lot of research on this where if you can engage children to explore and be interested and learn, it's so much more effective than just asking people to repeat answers that happen. By the way, I think what we're now talking about is a massive cultural shift that's going to happen because of Gen AI and technology. I think one of the challenges we have is that education will not be able to keep up with preparing generations coming through because change is happening faster than educational systems can cope.
No, and you think about it, generative AI can zone in on a child's characteristics and stipulate what they learn when, almost create a personalized curriculum for them and the medium to learn those things. So, we talked about in telecoms and in business, the personalization of marketing campaigns, etc. But, generative AI will deliver personalized education and personalized content to consume more effectively that education.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how well our systems adopt and cope with that, because we're still now we're in a very industrialized era approach to education. Exactly what you say, one size fits all. You start at 9, you finish at 4. It's literally run like a factory from the 1880s.
Right, Jeff. Are you ready for the finale of this podcast?
Is this going to be another question? Is this going to?
We're going to go into what we call now the TGI to go quick fire round, okay. Right? And I have a nice jingle that goes with this. We'll put it in post production. But what I'm going to do is give you a multiple choice question, and you're going to give me the answer based on your preference, right? So it's really that simple. So by the way, and we've customized this just for you, Jeff. So if you're sitting comfortably, we'll do TGI to go. TGI to go. Question number 1. You could go on vacation after this podcast, and you could go to Buenos Aires or Rio de Janeiro. Where would you go?
Rio.
Yeah? Do you like Rio? I'm sure you've been there before.
Yeah, I've been there before. Yes, I like Rio.
You like Rio? Have you been to Buenos Aires?
No,
I've not actually either. And
you've been to Rio?
Yeah, I've been to Brazil several times.
Why open up the opportunity for disappointment? Just keep doing the same thing you like.
If you could, you've got some spare time this afternoon. This is question 2. I'm going back to what we talked about before. You've got some spare time. Would you read a book or write a book?
Oh, I would read a book, but I feel like I want to write a book.
Yeah, that's something that's come up a lot, right? That when you've read a good book, I think particularly a good business book, you feel almost compelled to sit down and write something yourself. It's almost I don't know what it is, but it does create that desire, doesn't it?
Yeah, you feel it's a great opportunity to do that. But you can understand. I can completely understand writer's block, where starting is the hard bit.
Yeah. It's a little bit like I read my two younger children Enid Blyton every evening before they go to bed, and I did it with my two older children as well. And I read it in a very English fashion. They're very North American, so I read it as if I am Enid Blyton in 1938. And then as soon as you read a chapter, you think, I could be an actor. I don't know why that comes to my mind.
Well, just out of interest, have they revised the gender equality in Famous Five Enid Blyton, or are you teaching your children how family dynamics from the 1930s England?
That thankfully, what I'm reading them, The Faraway Tree, is what I'm reading them, which is being produced into a Hollywood movie next year, by the way. That's fairly politically correct.
Right.
But I know some other Enid Blyton novels are less so, and are very much ingrained in 1938 imperialist Britain. So I make sure... but no, the Faraway Tree is pretty, how should we say, diverse and modern in its character lineup and its storylines, which is good.
Well, it's amazing how storytelling and again culture. I think culture and storytelling. I think you should do another series just about culture, actually, because there's some association there.
Yeah. But as well, we my children also have the original Beatrix Potter books,
okay,
which go back.
Well, the original. You've got originals of those, or
not originals of them, but the original. I guess they're not originals, but the
actual first edition.
Yes, yeah. And they were written. I didn't know this. In the 19th century, right? And the language and the storylines are pretty tough going to read, right? And reading about a poor mouse that was working in a mill is quite difficult for my children to comprehend. Anyway, question 3. I don't know where this question came from, but Larissa put this one in there. Scotch eggs or eggs Benedict?
Eggs Benedict.
Yeah.
In the morning, Scotch eggs in the afternoon.
There you go. But Scotch eggs is a very British thing, right?
Yes, I don't know if you have those in the US or if they're called something different.
No. I think that's
maybe they're eggs in blankets. I don't know.
Yeah. They have a different name. Okay, here's a good one. Sheffield Wednesday or Sheffield United?
Sheffield United by birth.
You said that so quick.
Oh, that wasn't a choice. That was. I once stood on the cop in a Sheffield Wednesday match with my dad, where he just in the middle of 18,000 reasonably big Sheffield mining kind of guys, screaming at how bad Sheffield Wednesday were, and no one touched him because he's this old guy with a flat cap. There was a foot shorter than them. If I'd have said something like that, I would have been. I don't think I would have got off the cop.
Yeah. And even though you're a naturalized American now and you live on this side of the Atlantic, you still follow Sheffield United, right? It's still in your blood.
Yes, I still check, and whenever they go up to the Premiership, I always watch them, and they did this one season where it was incredible. But yeah, they didn't do a second season that way.
And this is a great question. Right. You can watch a movie later on this evening and you're presented with 2 options.
Okay.
The Full Monty or Kes?
It would have to be... I think it would have to be The Full Monty. I've never seen Kes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe it should be Kez because I've never seen Kez. I'm starting to feel like I'm going for the safe options. I'm going to say Kez.
Okay. Well, I think I read an article on Kez this morning in the BBC, and they proclaimed it as the greatest coming-of-age British film ever.
Right.
Yeah, and of course the connection between The Full Monty and Kez is The Full Monty is Sheffield, and Kez is Barnsley, right? So they're both from your neighbourhood. But no, I read this about Kez this morning, and it was actually filmed in 1969, which I find frightening.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story about the Full Monty, because that came out, we went to see this. It came out while we were in Dallas, of course, so we went to see it in a Dallas cinema, and we laughed at bits that nobody around us laughed at, and everyone around us laughed at bits that we didn't think were that funny. Yeah.
I bet the bit that you laughed at and they never laughed at was when they were learning to dance and they were doing the offside. That was...
Well, there's another bit. There was another bit where they were at the funeral and they say there's a line, there's nowt as queer as folk. And we thought that was really funny, but no one else thought that.
Again, cultural, Jeff. We'll bring that back to the cultural episode, right? Yeah. I think that's why it's important. Okay, well, we're out of time. It's been a wonderful conversation with you today, Jeff. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think it's been magical. I think it's been really great. And I look forward to, carrying this conversation on, maybe in Barcelona, maybe on another episode of the podcast for sure. But before we say goodbye today, is there any last messages for our listeners or any last points you would like to impart on our enormous fan base?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me. And I said this to you in Las Vegas. I think this is an example of storytelling. You actually hosting something like this. You've held a story for 50 minutes. I think storytelling isn't just about writing books and scripts. I think it's pretty much about everything that we do. I think lawyers tell a story. I think doctors tell a story. I think successful people tell the best stories.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
So that's a wrap for this episode of The Great Indoors, episode 3. Thank you very much, Jeff, for taking the time to speak with us. And, I look forward to speaking to you again in just a few months in Barcelona. So remember, for all updates on this season and all things The Great Indoors over the past few years, visit us at amdocs.com/The Great Indoors. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time as we continue exploring the human side of the digital age. I'm Matthew Roberts from Amdocs in Toronto, and have a great day wherever you are.